Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. San Antonio's Spanish missions were more than churches. They were communities that planted roots so deep they grew our city into a place known all over the world. Today we reveal the stories behind each of San Antonio's missions, show the connections forged over time, and how they've remained community foundations through the centuries. I'm your host, Emily Baucom. We're joined by Tom Castanos, the Alamo's Director of Interpretation, and P.T. Lathrop, the Chief of Interpretation and Education at San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. Thank you both for joining us.
You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
PT, as our regular listeners know, the Alamo is owned by the state of Texas, but its four sister missions on San Antonio's south side, put together, they are a national park.
Yes, indeed, and proudly so. Since 1978, when Congress created San Antonio Missions National Historical Park, and really been on the ground and running since about 1983. It takes a while to get rangers on the ground and hats on the head and plans in place. But for going on 41 years now, San Antonio Missions National Historical Park has been, I think, one of the many hearts of San Antonio.
So when you go to the four sister missions, they are manned by park rangers.
Yes, ma'am. And it's been a priority of both myself and the management team to really kind of get that word out. It's been my observation that the community, especially because it was such a community effort, has really grabbed on to the identity of both the park and its relationship with the Alamo as still the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in the state of Texas. And the community has been so proud of that fact that sometimes I wonder if we have lost sight of the fact that it's a national park unit. And so I've tried really hard to really promote that. There's a really large audience that is really just attracted to national park units. And I'm one of them. Obviously, I work for the National Park Service, but I have a map on my wall, and I will go to any national park site.
There are people who like to check off that they've gone to every national park.
100%, and they have different rituals, whether it's magnets or passport stamps or junior ranger books, you name it. But yes, we're a unit of the National Park Service. We have a visitor center. We have free tours every single day. We have a plethora of junior ranger options and more to come. So we'd love to have anyone come visit any of our sites.
Tom, before you worked here at the Alamo, you spent many years with the Park Service, teaching visitors about the history of the missions. Mm-hmm. Walk us through the history of the five missions and in what order they were built.
Sure. So the first mission in the San Antonio River Valley will be Mission Valero, the one that we'll eventually know as the Alamo in 1718. Originally on the opposite side of the river from where it is now, moved here in 1724. This was actually the anniversary of the founding of the site where we currently have it. You have San Jose coming along in 1720 next, about 6 miles south, also moved from an original location on the opposite side of the river. You never knew where it was going to flood when you first show up somewhere, and your initial location wasn't always the best. There's a third mission that more or less failed that was established in 1722, San Francisco Javier Nájera. It's represented by a state highway marker on Mission Road between Concepcion and San Jose. Finally, you get the three final missions, Concepcion, San Juan, and Espada, all coming in 1731 as, I used to say when I worked there, as failures in East Texas, but that's not really realistic. The process was not working, and there were complications with being in East Texas, so they were eventually reestablished here on the San Antonio River as the last three missions built here.
We can understand why they're on the San Antonio River, but why five in such close proximity?
Two real prominent reasons. It's easy to say that it was mutual protection because there was only one presidio, one cavalry fort for protection. But the other part of that is that the San Antonio River very quickly, the San Antonio River Valley, I should say, very quickly begins to flatten out in what we refer to geologically as the coastal plain. So finding an area that flood irrigation could be done immediately off the river with some altitude changes to have that gravity-fed watering limited the zone that they could be created to a fairly small area.
Did each mission specialize in something that made them unique, or did they complement each other in certain ways?
I think they complemented each other. Often interpretively, through all the years that I worked at the park, we would highlight a feature at each site, but other perhaps than maybe brick being made at Mission Espada, a very specific kind of ladrillo brick, and later a grist mill being built at San Jose, they largely did the same things. Their purpose was to be a community that would help bring the native population as part of the Spanish Empire.
Mission San Juan was exporting textiles. Obviously, each mission was producing textiles, but San Juan developed a niche to get productive enough to export textiles. And relatedly, Mission San Jose was exporting sugarcane. Obviously, each mission was probably exporting many other goods, and were all self-sufficient in their own right. But those are two little examples of where those missions specialized.
You actually had individual, the priests that are running the facilities and your environment, even though close together, the fields would be better for certain things at one place than they are others. And then the influence of what that management at each location does is going to make them a little bit independent, although still theoretically all doing the same thing. That's a great point.
In the Alamo's new Mission Gate and Lunette exhibit, there's a bronze art feature on the wall showing how the 5 missions were connected through the acequia system, and that was an early form of irrigation.
Every mission had at least one acequia madre, mother ditch, that would have been diverted off of the San Antonio River to create a waterable series of fields for each mission community that then reconnects to the San Antonio River. It was a pretty extensive network that altogether equaled about 50-odd miles of acequias that would stretch from here to, I always say, the outlet malls in San Marcos.
It's a really important feature in the park, and one that some visitors get to see, especially visitors to San Juan, but not all visitors are able to kind of visualize fully on the landscape. But as Tom mentioned, San Antonio had a network of dozens and dozens and dozens of miles of acequia. Today, San Antonio Missions National Historical Park protects about 24 miles of acequia, 13 of which are wet, meaning that 13 of those miles still carry water, where we have other historic ditches that just no longer carry water. It is one of the many jewels in the cap of San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. To be a National Historical Park, you can't just have the rich story. You have to have the things. You have to have the physical things on the landscape. And one of the reasons that makes us not just a National Historical Park, but a UNESCO World Heritage Site is that collection and that density of original Spanish colonial architecture and associated landscape features. Those original acequias are a big part of that fabric of historic integrity to the park, and managing them is a nonstop chore. We liken it to maybe the chore of painting the Golden Gate Bridge, where the task is just never, ever, ever, ever done. We have trees fall in the acequias. We have crawfish that build burrows in the side of the acequia, and then water finds the burrows and finds its way out, and it grows, and it eventually creates a leak. We have invasive aquatic plants, we have catfish, we have sedimentation. Really, you name it, it is a constant process, and we hire dozens and dozens of youth crews, namely to work alongside our facilities crew to maintain those acequias.
And I'm glad you brought up, it really was one of the key elements in the World Heritage nomination, having that resource still existing within the boundaries of the park, these acequias that could still be used.
Yeah, for sure.
Still
are. One of the best places to see it is at the aqueduct. Sometimes visitors might conflate the acequias and the aqueduct. The aqueduct is specifically at Mission Espada, is an elevated portion of the acequia where they were unable to find the right topography to continue carving in an earthen ditch, so they needed to elevate that portion of the acequia with stone, hence the aqueduct. So if folks have an opportunity to check that out, it is the only Spanish colonial aqueduct in the United States.
Amazing. There was a period in the late 1800s where you see all this development in and around downtown with the Alamo at the center. But what was happening at the other 4 missions during that time?
Each of those communities were growing in their own right. That period of history in the park is some of our least documented history, and that's probably in relation to the fact that also at that period of time was when the area was going through the most political turmoil. The period of the Six Flags of Texas, the Spanish flag, and Mexican independence, and Texas independence, and Texas joins the Union, and Texas joins the Confederacy, and Texas rejoins the Union. And in the backdrop of a lot of political turmoil and change, there's not a lot of strong historical record, but we do know that after secularization, those communities just really continued to grow. Some of the stories that we have from that area come from oral histories from Mission descendants, a community that we work really closely with.
Let's fast forward to modern day. Take us on a virtual tour, if you will, of each mission. What will we see at each one that gives us a piece of the story?
So that's a fantastic question. And what I like to ask folks to visualize, if you remember those transparent overhead projector sheets that your 7th grade teacher used.
I remember them well.
Me too. I don't know how many younger listeners might recall those, but I certainly do. And so while none of our mission sites are really complete, if you made a transparent landscape imagery of each mission site and overlaid them, you would be getting awfully close to a complete mission in the park. So to start at Mission Concepcion, you have some of the best examples of frescoes in the park. Obviously, inside the convento, there are some really nice and really well preserved and complete frescoes. But even on the exterior of Mission Concepcion's church, you'll see remnants of the plaster and frescoes there as well. If you know where to look, feel free to ask a park ranger and we can point those out to you. As the oldest unrestored church in the United States, it still holds some of that decor on the exterior. Moving south to Mission San Jose, you have the restored walled compound. The walls at each mission site were taken apart. The community that we mentioned earlier did not need walls going forward. And if you were going to build yourself a bakery or build yourself a home or build yourself a road, why go quarry new stone when you can repurpose old stone? So by and large, a lot of the walled compounds were taken apart. At Mission San Jose, they were restored in the 1930s, and you can get a sense, and they're right on top of the original foundation, so you can get a sense of what that walled compound feels like. Also at Mission San Jose, you can see other features such as the grist mill, Texas's oldest grist mill, which we do operate on special occasions. We do not mill, we do not process grain into flour, but we will spin the wheel and demonstrate how that works on special occasions, such as the World Heritage Festival, which just passed, National Park Week, and other events such as that. Moving further south, at Mission San Juan, you'll see intact acequias, which I referenced earlier, as well as the intact labores or farm fields. And at Mission San Juan, we have a really awesome partnership with the San Antonio Food Bank, where they manage a really large set of labores that they've expanded recently. We have a new nopales field honoring indigenous and native foodways. We have a peach orchard, we have a large fig orchard, and we have some labores dedicated to rotating crops, cabbages, broccoli, radishes are some examples of some recent crops in those fields. All we ask for the San Antonio Food Bank in return is to manage a small plot nearby that we call our historic demonstration farm, where we use as traditional farming practices as possible and as traditional crops as possible. So that's great to check out. Also at San Juan is a small nature hike called the Yanaguana Trail, which will take you down along the remnants of the old San Antonio River. And Mission Espada, the farthest south mission, we have its ranch. So each mission had a ranch often a few miles away. In Mission Espada's case, about 20 miles south, out in present-day Floresville, Texas. Rancho de las Cabras is the ranch that served Mission Espada. So you kind of overlay each of these, and you'll see that we have the ranch at Mission Espada, we have the farms at Mission San Juan, we have the grist mill and the compound at Mission San Jose, and the original frescoes at Mission Concepcion. And a visit to each will give you a really clear picture of what a complete mission really entails.
They're modern day parishes. You can go to church.
Yes, and in each mission, the church is still functioning and active, an active parish. The National Park Service, I should say, does not manage the churches. We have a really complex relationship and agreement with the Archdiocese of San Antonio since the founding of the park, which really honors and protects that separation between church and state. So yes, all of the churches are active. You can attend Mass, there are funerals, there are weddings, there are baptisms, you name it. It makes being a park ranger really dynamic.
I know there's a separation of church and state, but on a personal level, when you see that these missions are still functioning as churches, does that get emotional?
To me, it's really humbling. It's really, really humbling in the power of not just the broader San Antonio community, but those really specific communities to those mission churches. It's also humbling in a sense of time and place, and to see the power of the roots in some of these communities that we work really closely with is humbling.
There's an amazing collection of restored and preserved things all around our nation, whether it's the USS Constitution in Boston Harbor, or you go to Colonial Williamsburg. But at Williamsburg, when they finish blowing glass, the guy goes home to his apartment, right? And as much as the USS Constitution is a ship in the United States Navy, they're not going to trot it out and, enduring war. The missions are literally being used in many ways exactly the same way they were the day they were built, as far as the worship element of it. So it's not a show. It's not something that's put on. It's a legitimate item that's still being used by the community. And I think that's why the community has that deep connection with the park.
I've heard people come to the Alamo and ask about the other missions and say, I need to see the rose window. Tell us about the rose window.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece of art. It has many stories associated with it. It's been long been associated with a gentleman by the name of Pedro Huizar. Huizar family, still a huge part of the San Jose community. So it's a magnificent representation. That it was long considered one of the more important pieces of Spanish colonial artwork in the New World, and it's right there on the side of Mission San Jose's church.
PT, when people visit, you recommend they start in Mission San Jose where there's a visitor center.
Yes, ma'am. We have a visitor center. It's open every single day from 9 to 5. It has a bookstore, the only store in town where the proceeds benefit San Antonio Missions National Historical Park. Thank you, Western National Parks Association. Again, open 9 to 5, and that's also where you can get your map, you can get your Junior Ranger book, you can get your World Heritage Junior Ranger book. In about a year, little preview, you can get your Museum Ranger book, which is something that I'm working on. And you can also get a free tour. We offer free tours every single day at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., and 2:30 p.m. So come down and join us. I meet visitors all the time from around the United States and from around the country that show up to Mission San Jose. And we have an amazingly talented group of tour guides in San Antonio. I love our tour guides. I work with many of them. But a lot of folks don't know that the National Park Service is proud to offer free tours every single day. So if you're a traveler and you want it straight from the National Park Service or you're on a budget, please feel free to join any of our tours.
PT, right now is a really important time culturally for people to visit the missions because of a Dia de los Muertos celebration taking place. What will visitors see?
Oh, it is an awesome time. I don't know anybody that doesn't like this time of year. So at San Antonio Missions National Historical Park, we celebrate Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead, with an ofrenda display. For those that are unfamiliar, ofrendas are a collection of memorabilia, photographs, journals, food items, you name it, that are kind of placed on altars to honor lost loved ones. And at San Antonio Missions National Historical Park, what we do is we invite mission descendant families. These are folks that can trace their ancestry to the missions. And we invite those families out to build their ofrendas inside the granary at Mission San Jose. Those go up mid-October. They're up now. And they'll be on display through November 2nd. And visitors can come see those. And it's one of many opportunities that we try to provide where the public can really hear the lived experience stories from mission descendant families. We also have an exhibit inside Mission San Jose that talks from that lived experience, but the ofrendas are a really great way to connect with that history.
Tom, visitors coming to the Alamo generally know the Alamo is important because of the battle that took place here in 1836. But if you're interested in the Texas Revolution, some of the other missions have big ties too.
Absolutely. Mission Espada was the headquarters for Stephen F. Austin in 1835. While he's still kind of more or less in charge of the military, but not really. Nobody was in charge at that point in time. But he's actually sending scouts into San Antonio to look to see if it's practical for the Texians to take San Antonio from the good-sized Mexican detachment that's here under General Cos. This leads to an engagement near Mission Concepcion, the Battle of Concepcion, which the original literature talks about the bell towers being used as a lookout for the Mexican army coming down the river from San Antonio. The Mexican army is defeated in a brisk skirmish with Jim Bowie and some people, one that Stephen F. Austin didn't want to happen, but, things like that happen. So in a lot of ways, the missions were kind of a jumping off point for what would first be the Siege of Bejar, and then Valero, the Mission Valero, the Alamo, becomes the centerpiece as we get to the Battle of the Alamo.
We would all love to book vacations where we have endless amounts of time to truly see everything. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works. What would you say to encourage people, hey, you really need to set aside time to connect the dots and see all 5 of San Antonio's missions?
They're all unique. I think that's the most important thing. It's easy to paint with a broad brush and say they are the San Antonio missions, but they are as unique as snowflakes, and if you had 5 kids, all 5 kids would be different. I think you learn something from each of them.
I would say, one, make sure you come October through March so you're not running back to your car quickly in the Texas heat, so that you can enjoy, because it takes time to connect those dots. Yeah. It really does. And I still notice subtle differences, things that I've never noticed. And I am still putting together dots very, 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 very much. Taking the nature walk at Mission San Juan, walking the farm fields at Mission San Juan, taking your time to really walk around the facade of Mission Concepcion and looking for those original pieces of plaster and paint. Those are kind of the time to slow down and really tune in your senses. And that's when you'll connect with some of that authentic history.
And there are neighborhoods nearby. Tom, you were born and raised in this part of town. How closely tied are those neighborhoods with the historic missions?
They're tied very closely to the churches, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, because that's the deeper connection that goes back pre-National Park Service, pre-state park. The churches have been there for those communities throughout. They've come to embrace the parks because they see that the parks are there to maintain this existence for these places that may not have survived otherwise. Their quinceañeras, their weddings are in the churches. Their funerals are in the churches. But then that's only part of the story. There's quinceañera photos and graduation photos that are taken on these magnificent, beautifully kept grounds that the National Park Service maintains. There's events like you talked about, Dia de los Muertos, History and Genealogy Day, where people get to come and talk about their connections with their families all the way back to the creation of these facilities. They're a point of pride. Former Representative Ciro Rodriguez used to always point out that his Harlandale High School graduation ring from way back actually was in the shape of the rose window. So there's a deep connection throughout the community.
Tom Castanos and P.T. Lathrop, thank you so much for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We have linked to the San Antonio Mission's National Historical Park website, where you can see what each mission looks like today and how to start planning your visit. And of course, a link to plan your visit to the Alamo. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.